Hello, my name is Diane Weiss. I'm a former newspaper reporter. I worked in Nevada from 1979 to 1985, covering news in Las Vegas and Carson City, before I was promoted to Washington, D.C., where I spent the next 14 years covering Congress. And then I went on to a national public employee union, where I wrote for their magazine and spent the next 18 years until I retired. My wife and I then came back to Nevada to retire, and we live in Reno. Murals, paintings on walls, are, by their very nature, impermanent. If outside, they suffer from weathering, or are whitewashed away to make room for another, or none at all. If inside, rooms are remodeled. With time, buildings are torn down, and with them, their murals. Muralists can suffer a similar fate. No matter how talented or prolific, their artistic legacies can fade with time. Eventually, they, and their life's work, are all but forgotten, except by friends and family. This, unfortunately, has been the fate of Jon Metcalf. Metcalf was once a well-known Nevada muralist. He painted throughout the state, beginning with and mostly in Las Vegas. He called Carson City home for his last 26 years. He may well have been Nevada's most prolific muralist, but, with the exceptions noted earlier, knowledge of his life and art has nearly vanished from living memory since his death in 2001 at the age of 68. I know. This year, I began to research Metcalf's life and murals after I learned about him from Ruth Small of Dayton. She works part-time at the Antique Mall in Mound House. A few days before Christmas, my wife and I stopped there and discovered this wonderful 2x4-foot oil-on-canvas painting that Jon Metcalf painted in 1990 for her husband, David. David, a train lover, knew that Metcalf painted trains in murals. He commissioned him to paint the famous Virginia and Truckee railroad steam locomotive, the number 22, also known as the Inyo. The real one can be seen at the Nevada State Railroad Museum here in Carson City. Ruth told me she named Metcalf's painting Ghost Train because, quote, "It looks like it's going to take off into the sky." After her husband passed, she stored the painting in a box until she decided to sell it. We purchased the painting because I, too, had painted the Inyo. Although not as fine as Metcalf's, mine is even larger because I wanted it to hang on our backyard fence. Painted on a plywood board, it measures 4 by 5 feet. Metcalf used oil paints. I used exterior house paint and acrylics. Both now hang in our home. Ruth told us about Metcalf. He had frequented their locksmith shop in Carson City. She knew he painted murals throughout the state and told me one still existed in a building on Route 50 East. I soon visited that building. Unique sounds and auto accessories. The owner confirmed the mural still existed, though now it is hidden permanently behind a newer wall that encloses a garage. I set out to learn as much as I could about Jon Metcalf. Unfortunately, I could find very little information. There was an 80-word description of some of his works in a reference book listing Nevada's painters from 1845 to 1980. But the Nevada Art Museum in Reno and one in Las Vegas could find nothing else in their archives. Libraries at the University of Nevada in Reno and Las Vegas also came up empty, except for what they could find on the internet. Like me, they found only a few posted news stories. One was a 1987 article in the Mason Valley News. Reporter Laura Tennant who today is an ex officio member and historian of the Dayton Historical Society, had interviewed Metcalf not long after he painted the now hidden mural. She wrote that Metcalf's, quote, artistry is known all over America, but the majority of his murals have been painted in Nevada. Her story was accompanied by a black and white photo of a portion of that now hidden mural. The building was then the D-Bar-M Hitchin Post Western Store. I discovered this photo at the Nevada Historical Society in Reno. They had a thin folder holding a few newspaper clips about Metcalf and his murals. There were also about a dozen color photographs, including a few of the now hidden mural on Route 50. Above his signature and the year 1987, Metcalf had written a dedication, quote, to Charlie Russell. Metcalf explained to Tennant that the famous Western artist Charles M. Russell, quote, has been my hero since I was 15 years old. The History Society's folder also contained a short newspaper obituary. With its list of survivors, I was able to track down Metcalf's son, Jon Allen Metcalf of Las Vegas. He agreed to help me in my quest to learn more about his father and to find photographs his father had kept of his life's work. Once found, he also agreed to let me photograph them so I could share some of them with you here during the Brewery Art Center's Murals and Music Art Festival. I also wanted to write the story of Jon Metcalf, the muralist. What follows is that story. Some of it is told in his own words, as captured by reporters like Tennant when he showed up in town to paint a mural. Some are details of his life he shared with those reporters. Jon Allen Metcalf and his mother, Annette Blom, the muralist's ex-wife, also shared their memories with me so I could tell his story. Let's begin. Metcalf was born February 25th, 1933 in Wellington, Kansas, the youngest of 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. He was christened Jack Lee. As he got older, he decided he didn't like that name, so he called himself Jon, spelled Jon. Later, that's how he signed his art. He told Tennant he was, quote, raised on a large cattle and horse ranch and wheat farm, and came west with his father, who taught pipeline welding during World War II. By the time Jon was born, his older brother Eugene, whom the family called Gene, was showing artistic talent. 8 years older than Jon, Eugene was considered by the family to be the one who would become an artist. But Jon also had early artistic flair. Quote, I first knew I wanted to be an artist when I was born, he told Mason Valley News reporter Tennant in 1987. He added, quote, my parents said I was always drawing on something, even on the walls. In 1966, Jon talked about his life to Tacoma, Washington News Tribune reporter Bart Ripp when the artist came to town to paint a few murals. Quote, Metcalf's vagabond craft began when he was 8 and fell under the spell of his older brother Eugene, who was then 16 and on his way to becoming a world-famous artist, Ripp wrote. Jon said that after his parents, quote, split up, Eugene took me on the road. He had a beat-up old Chevy, and we took off painting. Eugene would go on to have his own illustrious career in art. Quote, he's been art director of all the sign companies in the world, Jon said, adding, quote, biggest one was the Melrose Sign Company, right across from the MGM studios in Hollywood. Having an older brother who was on his way to becoming a professional artist made it tough for Jon when growing up, his ex-wife Annette told me. Quote, Gene was the one who was always looked at in the family as an artist. So, no one paid attention to Jon, unquote, when he expressed an interest in painting. But Jon, without any formal training, was determined to become an artist. Quote, "He went out to the desert outside of Vegas," said Annette. "He said he camped out and he painted everything he saw until he liked it. Then he went back to Vegas and went into a Western bar and told the man, 'I'll paint you a mural for $100, and if you don't like it, you don't pay me.' And that's how he started. And no one ever did not pay him," unquote. Jon began painting murals in Las Vegas around 1961. He told Mason Valley News reporter Tennant. He was quite prolific. By the time Annette married him in 1964, he had already boasted to her of having painted about 3,000 murals throughout Las Vegas, including on the walls of Caesar's Palace, where they married. Tennant wrote that Jon's murals also graced the Silver Dollar Saloon and Dance Hall in Las Vegas. He did murals at various Las Vegas casinos, including Circus Circus. He painted members of the Grand Ole Opry in the Showboat in Las Vegas and Western scenes in the original Nashville, Nevada club near Boulder City. He painted in northern Nevada as well, including portraits of Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe on billboards advertising Dayton's Old Corner Bar on Highway 50 East at Mound House. The list went on. Jon and Annette didn't remain in Nevada. Quote, "We moved a lot," she said. One important home was in Jamestown, North Dakota, where Jon went to work painting murals for Ramada Inn. One was this mural that Ramada Inn in Jamestown, North Dakota, commissioned as a series of murals, quote, "depicting life on the prairie," unquote, according to a local news story. His son, John Allen Metcalf, told me the company's owner, Paul Bjornson, quote, "had him painting wherever there was a wall at that Ramada Inn. He did it in black light, and it was amazing." So-called blacklight murals use ultraviolet lights and fluorescent paint for a glow-in-the-dark effect. Ray McConnell, a writer for the Independent Star News in Pasadena, California, reported in 1962 that Metcalf claimed of having painted more blacklight murals, quote, "than any man alive." Of such blacklight murals, McConnell wrote, quote, "The occupation might be considered slightly hazardous, since the ingredients that give the paintings its glow under special lighting is somewhat radioactive when wet. Quote, "I wash my hands very carefully all the time," unquote, says this reckless young artist. The Las Vegas Convention Center commissioned him in 1963 to paint, quote, "3 large murals in black light for our cocktail lounge at the convention center and 3 large display cases in conjunction with the State Museum's exhibits of animals such as mountain sheep, beaver, goats, etc. in our rotunda," wrote George W. Albright, executive director of the Clark County Fair and Recreation Board, in a letter of recommendation. Today, as far as I know, Jon Metcalf's works are viewable only in photographs that he or others took and preserved. His son found a trove of them at my request. I photographed them for digital preservation and to illustrate this story. None, as far as I can tell, are blacklight murals. Those that do exist, mostly, are not labeled as to place and date. Many are Western scenes, such as this mural. Some were large-scale murals on outdoor walls. Some were smaller murals on outdoor walls. Some were of famous celebrities, like Barbara Eden, shown here with a painting Metcalf made of or for her. Some were local sports celebrities, such as this, in the Nevada Appeals newspaper photo in March 2000 of Metcalf with this mural at Cheers Food and Spirits at Goney and Hot Springs Roads. It depicts Gardnerville's Sean Estes, quote, pitching to Carson's Matt Williams, capturing area high school stars who went on to the majors, the story said. Some were on local buildings, like this one of Model Dairy in Reno. Tacoma News Tribune reporter Bart Ripp had this to say about the muralist, quote, Jon Metcalf's canvas is an empty wall anywhere in the world or the Western Hemisphere or half the hemisphere or America or most of the country or Western Washington. John likes it here. Metcalf is, quote, an industry unto himself, Ripp added. Quote, for 45 years, Metcalf has roamed America, painting murals on blank walls, begging for schooner ships, steam trains, and Marty Robbins, unquote, referring to the American singer, songwriter, and NASCAR racing driver. Quote, I don't specialize, Metcalf told the reporter. I do it all. I travel all over half the world and half the hemisphere. I paint everything. But he had his limits. Annette said he refused to paint for an art gallery if that meant he had to work solely for them. While living in Scottsdale, Arizona, a gallery owner, quote, offered him a full-time position and said they would make him world-renowned. She told me, quote, the catch was he could only paint for them, and anyone who wanted a painting would have to go through the gallery. He turned it down. He said, nobody's going to tell me who I can paint for. How should an artist be remembered when their art is mostly lost forever? What is their legacy? Will anyone remember or even care? Perhaps Jon Metcalf's legacy is in the enormous effort he made over the decades to show his love of the West, especially of his home in Nevada. That's how I see it anyway. Jon Metcalf made his art free for anyone to see. He wanted to make them magnificently huge. No art museum could hold them, and he seemed perfectly okay with that. He made his art anywhere he could, as long as they paid him. The headline on a March 2000 Nevada Appeals story by staff writer Rex Bovey declared, Artist leaves trail of murals across West. Bovey wrote, quote, once the subject of a mural has been selected, Metcalf doesn't wait for sketch approvals of that sort of detail. He pulls out a piece of charcoal and makes his sketch right there on the wall, occasionally using a yardstick to check his proportions. Out come the paints and brushes, and sometimes just hours later, Metcalf's work is done. How many murals did he do over his lifetime? Nobody knows. Metcalf himself didn't know. Quote, I lost track of everything after 10,000, he told the Tacoma News reporter in 1996. That, he said, was 20 years ago. He added, I can do 5 or 6 motel rooms in a day. In 1987, 14 years before his death, he told Mason Valley News reporter Laura Tennant that, quote, I have painted more murals than any man alive. I don't know anybody who has painted more square footage than I have. Neither his son John nor ex-wife Annette, know how many murals he painted, but Annette knows of one that Jon badly wanted to paint, but never did. She told me, quote, he had been talking to then Vice President Johnson about doing a big mural for Texas. That went on the wayside when President Kennedy was shot. But that was his big dream at the time, to have done that. And that never happened. Do any of his murals still exist? The only one I could find is the one hidden behind a wall on a business in Carson City. But I have his large painting of the Inyo locomotive, and his family has some smaller paintings. For me and his family, these artworks are a part of Jon Metcalf's legacy that we can hang on our walls. To us, they are precious. But what has he left for the rest of us to appreciate? Is there somewhere a work of art that Metcalf left for his beloved state of Nevada? In fact, there is. Rex Bovee, writing in his March 2000 Nevada Appeal story, wrote, quote, but even if remodeling should wipe Metcalf's murals from the walls of Wall Drug in North Dakota, if a roller should paint over his work in the offices of Top Gun at Fallon Naval Air Station, if an earthquake wipes out the Mural Inn, or political correctness drapes the nudes in Jack's Bar, Metcalf's work is destined to be noted well into this century. Buried in a sealed capsule beneath the flagpole in front of the Nevada Legislative Building is the state's revolutionary bicentennial postcard, designed by Metcalf. Metcalf was the official bicentennial artist for Nevada, and his was the only artist's work in the time capsule, which will be opened for the nation's tricentennial on July 4th, 2076. I purchased a 6 by 12 inch limited edition official bicentennial commemorative card on eBay. Metcalf had signed it to Jim, believed by Metcalf's son to be Jim Santini, then a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Nevada. Quote, thank you for being such a great friend and a friend of our state, unquote, he wrote. This is also Metcalf's legacy. He, too, was a great friend of Nevada. Quote, he really loved Nevada, said his son John Allen Metcalf. Quote, he really knew Nevada's history because he would tell it to me all the time. I think it most resembled what he thought of the West and what it should be like. If your mentors are Charles Russell and Frederick Remington, that makes a lot of sense. His murals may have vanished forever, but Jon Metcalf's life and artistry will be remembered because there are newspaper stories and photographs of his murals that his family has allowed me to share with you and donate to the Nevada Historical Society, along with this story. In conclusion, I would like to thank Jon Allen Metcalf and his mother, Annette, who helped me to honor this unique artist. Thanks also to Ruth Small for setting me on this historical quest by selling us Metcalf's Ghost Train. My wife and I will always appreciate and cherish it. I would also like to thank Laura Tennant, whose story for the Mason Valley News gave me my first glimpse into Metcalf's life and art. Finally, thanks to the Brewery Arts Center for allowing me to share Jon Metcalf's story and his art during this Murals and Music Festival.